The last of the dinner rush was finally over. The air in the restaurant, which had been buzzing with the clatter of plates and the loud, happy chatter of people unwinding after a long day, now settled into a soft, tired hum. It was that quiet, in-between time. The time where the waitstaff started to breathe again, refilling salt shakers and wiping down tables with slow, practiced movements. The smell of roasted garlic and herbs still hung warmly in the air, mixed with the sharp, clean scent of the lemon spray they used on the wood. Behind the small, polished host stand, a young woman was stacking menus. She jumped a little when he appeared, not because he made a sound, but because he seemed to simply materialize out of the soft lighting of the entryway. He stood there, waiting patiently for her to look up. He was an older man, maybe in his late 40s or early 50s. It was hard to tell. Life had written its story clearly on his face, with lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and squinting into the sun, or perhaps into a bright spotlight long ago. His hair was more gray than brown, a little too long, and swept back in a way that suggested it was more from the wind than from any styling. He wore a simple, worn jacket over a clean but faded t-shirt and dark trousers that had seen better days. Over one shoulder was a faded blue backpack, the kind students use, its fabric soft and thin from use. It wasn't heavy. It seemed to hold just a few things, but his eyes were calm. A clear, quiet blue. They held none of the nervousness or desperation she sometimes saw in people who came to the door after hours looking for leftovers. He just stood, his hands at his sides, and offered her a small, tentative smile. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice automatically shifting into polite, professional mode, though the kitchen was closed for new orders. "Yes, thank you," he said. His voice was softer than she expected, a low, gentle rumble. He glanced past her into the main dining room. His gaze landed on the piano in the corner. It was a beautiful old grand piano, its dark wood polished to a high shine. It was more a piece of decoration than anything else. The restaurant owner had bought it at an auction years ago, thinking it gave the place a classy feel. A local musician played bland jazz standards on Friday nights, but otherwise it sat silent, a glorified shelf for a small potted plant and a tasteful brass lamp. The man looked back at her. "I was wondering," he began, then paused, as if choosing his words with great care. "I was wondering if I might be able to play. The piano, I mean. For a little while." The hostess blinked. This was a new one. "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. We don't really. That is, our pianist isn't scheduled until Friday. It's just for decoration mostly." He nodded, as if he'd expected this answer. He didn't turn to leave. Instead, he took a small breath. "I understand. I don't mean to be a bother. It's just, could I play for a short time? Maybe 30 minutes? In exchange for a meal?" The words hung in the air. Play for a meal. It was so direct, so strangely formal. He wasn't begging. He was proposing a trade. His skills, whatever they were, for some food. The hostess was completely thrown. Her job was to seat people with reservations and politely turn away those without. This was a whole different category. One moment, please. Let me get the manager." She hurried back towards the kitchen, her sensible shoes whispering on the tile floor. In the back office, she found the manager. He was a man in his mid-30s, with the perpetually tired but focused look of someone who spent his life putting out small fires. He was hunched over a laptop, glasses perched on the end of his nose, scrolling through numbers on a spreadsheet. The faint green light of the screen reflected on his face. "Hey," the hostess said, poking her head in. "There's a guy out front. He's asking something weird." The manager didn't look up. "Weird how? Does he have a complaint about the risotto?" No, nothing like that. He wants to play the piano. Says he'll play for 30 minutes in exchange for some food. That made the manager look up. He pushed his glasses up into his hair and rubbed his eyes. A piano player? Now? It's almost 9:30. That's what he said. He looks like he could use a hot meal. The manager sighed, a long, weary sound that came from deep in his chest. He was a practical man. He ran a tight ship. The piano was a dust-collecting relic. Letting a stranger play, it was a liability. What if he was terrible? What if he drove the last few lingering customers away? What if he broke it? 1,000 practical problems scrolled through his mind, but another part of him, a part that had been buried under spreadsheets and vendor invoices and staff schedules, nudged him. It was a quiet, inconvenient part that remembered he had once loved music, that he had gone to concerts in college, that the piano had always seemed a little sad just sitting there, unused. "All right," he said, standing up and stretching his back. "Let's see what this is about." He followed the hostess back to the front. The man was still standing there, perfectly still, his hands now clasped gently in front of him. He didn't fidget. He just waited. The manager took him in the worn clothes, the calm eyes, the posture that was somehow both humble and dignified. "I'm the manager," he said, not unkindly. "My hostess tells me you have a proposition." "Yes, sir," the man said, nodding slightly. "I would like to play your piano for 30 minutes. If you find it acceptable, perhaps I could have something to eat from the kitchen. Anything is fine. I'm not picky." The manager crossed his arms. "You a professional musician?" A flicker of something memory, perhaps, or pain passed behind the man's eyes so quickly the manager almost missed it. "I have played for many years," he said simply. It wasn't really an answer. The manager looked past him, into the dining room. There were only 3 tables left. A couple sharing a dessert, quietly talking. 2 friends finishing a bottle of wine, their conversation now a comfortable murmur. An older man reading a book with a cup of coffee. The peaceful end of the night. He looked at the piano. It really did just sit there against every practical bone in his body. The manager felt the decision form. It was a small risk. 30 minutes. If the guy was awful, he could politely cut it short, give him a sandwich to go, and send him on his way. The cost was a plate of pasta. "All right," the manager said, surprising himself. 30 minutes. You start now. You play till 10 o'clock. If it's suitable, the chef will make you something. Deal?" A real smile touched the man's lips then. It transformed his face, making the lines around his eyes crinkle with genuine warmth. It was a grateful smile, but not an overjoyed one. It was the smile of someone who had been given a small, precious gift. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion he quickly controlled. "Thank you very much. That is more than fair." He stepped past the host's hand and walked into the dining room. He moved quietly, almost like a shadow. The few customers glanced up, curious about the new arrival who wasn't being led to a table. They saw a man who looked a little down on his luck, heading towards their fancy, unused piano. Some felt a twinge of annoyance. They were having a nice, quiet evening. They didn't need some street performer banging out off-key tunes. The manager and the hostess watched from the archway. The man approached the piano not like a conqueror, but like a pilgrim reaching a shrine. He stopped beside it and for a long moment just looked at it. Then, with a reverence that was palpable, he reached out and let his fingertips brush the curve of its lid. It was a touch of hello, of recognition. He slid his backpack off his shoulder and placed it gently on the floor beside the bench. Then he sat down. He didn't immediately play. He just sat on the bench, straight but not stiff, and placed his hands lightly on his knees. He took a deep, slow breath, his shoulders rising and falling. He seemed to be listening to the quiet of the room, to the distant clink of dishes from the kitchen, to the soft murmur of the last customers. He was centering himself. Then he lifted the fallboard, revealing the row of black and white keys. He stretched his hands, fingers long and surprisingly graceful, and finally placed them on the keys. The manager held his breath. The hostess leaned forward. At their table, the reading man put a finger in his book to mark his page and looked over. The couple paused their conversation. The man at the piano began to play. The first notes were soft and clear. They floated into the air of the dining room like little bubbles of sound. It was a simple, pretty tune. Something classical. A piece by Chopin, though most people in the room wouldn't have known the name. It was the kind of music you might hear in the background of an old movie or in a nice hotel lobby. The manager, still standing by the archway, felt his shoulders relax a little. Okay, this was fine. The man could play. He wasn't a fraud. His fingers moved over the keys with a gentle confidence. There were no mistakes, no fumbling. It was pleasant, it was. Nice. He glanced at the hostess and gave her a small, quick nod that said, "See? It's okay." "He's all right." She smiled back, relieved. The risk hadn't blown up in their faces. In the kitchen, the chef had been told about the deal. He'd grunted, shrugged his big shoulders, and started pulling out ingredients. He decided on a simple pasta dish: garlic, oil, chili flakes, a good handful of parsley from the walk-in. Something quick and hot and filling. He listened with one ear as the music drifted through the pass-through window. He was a practical man, his world built on the feel of a sharp knife and the sizzle of a pan. The piano music was just another sound in the restaurant, like the rumble of the dishwasher or the clang of a pot. It was competent. It would earn the guy his food. The customers who had noticed the man sat back in their seats. The older man with the book went back to reading, the piano now forming a gentle, unobtrusive soundtrack to his novel. The couple sharing the dessert leaned in again, their conversation dropping to a lower whisper, the music a pleasant blanket over their words. The two friends with the wine nodded along slightly, the melody fitting nicely with the last of their bottle. The man at the piano played on. His eyes were half closed, his face calm. He moved through the Chopin piece to its end, the final note fading away cleanly into the quiet room. He paused for just a second, his hands hovering above the keys. Then he began something new. This started similarly, a few low, thoughtful notes. But there was a different weight to them, a feeling of clouds gathering. The manager, who had been about to turn and go check on the closing paperwork, paused. He didn't know much about classical music, but he could feel a shift in the air. This wasn't just another pretty tune. The man's posture changed. It was subtle, but it was there. Before, he had been playing for them. Now, it was as if he had forgotten they were there entirely. His back straightened, not with stiffness, but with a kind of power. His shoulders, which had been rounded and soft, seemed to broaden. His head tilted slightly, as if he was listening to a voice only he could hear. Coming from deep inside the piano. The notes began to come faster. They weren't just single notes now, but great, rolling waves of them. They cascaded down the keyboard like water over rocks. Then his left hand struck a series of deep, powerful chords that vibrated right through the floorboards. The sound wasn't just in the air. You could feel it in your chest. The reading man's fingers slipped from his book. He didn't notice. He was staring, his mouth slightly open. The book lay forgotten in his lap. The couple stopped whispering. They didn't look at each other. They both just turned slowly, as if pulled by a string, to face the piano. The woman's spoon, hovering over the last bite of chocolate cake, was lowered silently to the plate. In the kitchen, The chef's hand, shaking a pan over the flame, went still. The pasta sizzled, untended. He stood, frozen, his head cocked. This was not background music. This was a storm. This was a story being told without words. The two friends with the wine put their glasses down. They didn't speak. One of them simply reached out and put a hand on the other's arm, her eyes wide. The manager was rooted to the spot. His practical mind, which had been calculating the cost of the pasta and the electricity, went completely blank. All the thoughts of spreadsheets and schedules were washed away by this tidal wave of sound. He was looking at the same man in the same warm jacket, but he wasn't seeing him. He was seeing the music. The man's hands were a blur, flying from one end of the keyboard to the other with impossible speed and absolute precision. But it wasn't just the technical skill, the sheer, breathtaking ability of it. It was the emotion. The music swelled, soaring to heights that made your heart ache, then plunged into valleys of such deep, tender sadness that the breath caught in your throat. It was joyful and tragic all at once. It spoke of memories bright, sunny days long gone, and losses that still had sharp edges. It was the sound of someone's entire life, poured out through their fingers. The hostess had brought a hand to her mouth. Her eyes were shining. She was young, an art student working nights to pay her bills. She knew what it was to see someone do something with their whole being. This was that. This was mastery. This was art, happening right in front of her in a little restaurant on an ordinary Tuesday night. The music built and built, a tremendous wave gathering itself. The man at the piano was no longer a quiet, tired figure. He was a conductor, a sculptor, a force of nature. His body moved with the rhythm, leaning into the powerful chords, drawing back for the delicate, whispering passages. Sweat beaded on his temple, but he didn't seem to feel it. He was somewhere else in the world the music was creating. For the manager, time dissolved. He wasn't sure if 30 seconds had passed or 10 minutes. He was completely lost in it. He saw not a stranger, but a person revealing the deepest, most precious part of himself. This wasn't a performance for a meal. This was a confession. This was a gift, given freely, because the man simply couldn't hold it inside anymore. The piano had asked, and his soul had answered dot, and then, just when it seemed the sound couldn't get any bigger, any more powerful, it began its final climb. The notes came faster, higher, more intense. Every person in the room was holding their breath. The chef had stepped out of the kitchen, a dish towel dangling forgotten from his hand, his apron smudged with oil. The busboy had crept out from the back, leaning against the doorframe. The waitress stood by her station, a stack of menus hugged to her chest. The man threw his whole self into the final, magnificent chords. They were thunderous, triumphant, and yet filled with a beautiful, heartbreaking sorrow. They echoed through the room, vibrating in the glassware, in the light fixtures, in the bones of the listener's dot, and then silence. A deep, total, ringing silence. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was a silence that was full of the music that had just been. It hung in the air, heavy and sacred. The man's hands dropped from the keys and fell into his lap. His head bowed forward, his shoulders slumping. The powerful figure was gone, and the tired, humble man in the worn jacket was back. He sat there, breathing heavily, spent. For a long moment, no one moved. No one made a sound. Then, as if waking from a dream, the older man with the book slowly, deliberately, closed the cover. He placed both hands flat on it and began to clap. Not a loud, wild applause, but a slow, solid, respectful clap. A recognition dot, it broke the spell. The couple jumped to their feet, their chairs scraping back, their applause sudden and enthusiastic. The two friends were standing too, clapping and shaking their heads in disbelief. The hostess was clapping, tears now streaking down her cheeks. The busboy whistled loudly. The manager just stared. His heart was pounding. He looked at the man bowing slightly at the piano, a shy, almost embarrassed gesture, and then he looked around at his restaurant, at the faces of his staff and his customers, all of them transformed by wonder. The quiet, ordinary room felt charged, different. It felt like a place where magic had just happened. He realized, with a jolt, that the 30 minutes were probably up. The deal was done. But the deal felt meaningless now. They hadn't just given a meal. They had been given something priceless. And the man at the piano, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand, looked like he needed that plate of pasta more than ever. He had poured out everything he had. The applause washed over him like a warm wave. He kept his head bowed for a moment longer, letting the sound of it sink in. It wasn't the roaring, screaming applause of a huge concert hall. It was something more intimate, more real. It was the sound of a dozen people who had been taken on a journey they never expected and were saying thank you. Slowly, he looked up. His face was flushed, and he looked a little dazed, like someone who had just woken from a deep sleep. He gave a small, awkward nod to the room, his hands still folded in his lap. He seemed almost shy, shrinking back into himself after the immense force of the music. The manager was the first one to move. He walked across the dining room, his steps careful, as if the floor might crack. He stopped a few feet from the piano bench. The manager began, but his voice caught. He cleared his throat. That was incredible. The man at the piano offered a tired smile. "Thank you for letting me play," he said, his voice rough. "It's a beautiful instrument. A little out of tune in the upper register, but beautiful." The casual comment, the technical note about the tuning, was so ordinary it was jarring. It was like a wizard commenting on the quality of his wand after casting an earth-shattering spell. "The food," the manager said suddenly, remembering the deal. "Your meal, it's ready. Please, come sit. Anywhere you like." The man looked toward the kitchen door where the chef stood, still holding his dish-towel. The chef gave a single, firm nod. "Thank you," the man said again. He stood up, his movements stiff. He picked up his faded backpack from the floor, slung it over one shoulder, and followed the manager to a quiet table in the corner, not far from the piano itself. The other customers were still talking in hushed, excited tones. They kept glancing over at him, but they didn't approach. There was a respectful distance, a sense that he had given them something private, and they shouldn't intrude. The manager didn't go back to his office. Instead, he pulled out the chair opposite the man and sat down. "Do you mind?" he asked. "Not at all," the man said. A few moments later, the waitress arrived, not with a simple plate of pasta in a to-go container, but with a full dinner setting. A real plate, real silverware, a cloth napkin. The pasta smelled of garlic and chili and good olive oil. A small basket of warm bread was placed beside it. A glass of ice water, then a second glass, this one, with a little of the house red wine, poured by the chef himself. "On the house," the waitress said softly, her eyes kind. The man looked at the spread in front of him, and for the first time, his calm composure seemed to crack. His eyes grew shiny. He blinked a few times, quickly, and looked down at his hands. "This is very kind, more than I agreed to." "You gave us more than we agreed to," the manager said simply. The man nodded, took a slow breath, and picked up his fork. He ate carefully, with a quiet gratitude in every movement. He wasn't ravenous. He was savoring. The first bite seemed to ease something in him, a physical tension leaving his shoulders. The manager waited, not wanting to push. He just sat, watching the last of the other customers slowly, reluctantly, gather their things and leave. Each one, on their way out, paused near the table. The older man with the book simply placed a hand briefly on the pianist's shoulder as he passed, a wordless gesture of respect. The couple smiled and said, "Thank you for the music." The two friends gave him 2 thumbs up, grinning. Soon it was just the two of them, the quiet hum of the kitchen cleaners and the gentle clink of the fork against the plate. After a while, the man spoke, his eyes on his food. "You're wondering," he said, not as a question. "A little bit," the manager admitted. "I don't need your life story, but that in there, that doesn't just happen. People don't just walk in off the street and play like that." A faint, sad smile touched the man's lips. He took a sip of water. "No," he agreed, "they don't." He was quiet for so long, the manager thought he might not say anything else. He was ready to let it go. The music was enough. "My father," the man began, his voice low, "was a piano teacher. A strict one. He saw something in my hands when I was very small." He held them up, looking at his long, slender fingers. They were clean, but the nails were short and uneven, like he kept them trimmed with a pocket knife. "He started me when I was 4. By 7, I was playing pieces meant for adults. By 12, I was winning competitions. It was all I knew. School was just the time between practicing." He took another bite, chewing slowly, gathering his thoughts. The manager just listened. "I went to a famous music school," he continued. "A very good one. It was all set. I was going to be a concert pianist. I was going to tour the world, play with great orchestras, make records." He said these things not with pride, but with a flat tone, like he was reciting an old schedule for a trip he never took. "What happened?" The manager asked the question softly. The man shrugged. A small, helpless movement. "A lot of things. The pressure. It's a different kind of pressure. It's not just about playing the notes right. It's about being perfect every single time. It's about being a personality, a product. I was good at the music. I was terrible at the rest of it. The interviews, the schmoozing, the constant judgment. My hands would shake before going on stage. Real, bad shaking." He paused, looking past the manager into the middle distance of the dim restaurant. "Then my father passed away, suddenly, and all that pressure, that life he had built for me. It just felt like a cage made of someone else's dreams. I had a big debut scheduled, a very important one. I canceled it. I just walked away." The words hung in the air. Walked away. People were angry. My teachers, my agent, my family, friends. They called me a waste. They said I was throwing away a gift from God. He said this last part without bitterness, just a tired acceptance. Maybe I was, but staying was making me sick. It was killing the very thing they said I was supposed to cherish, the love of the music. He finished the last of his pasta, wiping the plate clean with a piece of bread. The simple, honest act of eating a good meal seemed to steady him. "So you just stopped?" the manager asked. "Not completely," the man said, shaking his head. "I couldn't. The music is in here." He tapped his chest. "It's like a need, like breathing. But I played for myself. In practice rooms late at night, or in empty churches if I could find one open. Sometimes, if times got very tight, I would find a place with a piano, like tonight. I'd offer to play for a meal or a little cash. Most places say no, some say yes. It keeps me connected, but away from the spotlight, away from that crushing weight." He looked around the cozy restaurant. "This," he said, gesturing gently with his hand, "this is what I missed. Playing for people who are just living, who are eating, talking, thinking. Not critics with notebooks, just people. The music goes into the room and becomes part of their evening. It's real. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be true." The manager felt a lump in his throat. He thought of his own life, of the spreadsheets and the constant pressure to make the numbers work. He understood, in a way, the desire to escape a cage, even a gilded one. "What's your name?" the manager asked. He realized he'd never asked. The man hesitated for a second, as if deciding whether to give his real one. "People used to call me Leo," he said finally. "Well, Leo," the manager said, leaning forward, "my restaurant is closed tomorrow, but we're open again the day after. And I have a piano that, as you noted, could use a tuning, but mostly just sits there." Leo looked at him, his blue eyes cautious, guarded. "I'm not offering you a charity gig," the manager said firmly. "I'm offering you a job. Weekends, Friday and Saturday nights. 3 sets, 45 minutes each. You play what you want. We pay you a fair wage. And you eat on the house every night you work." Leo stared at him. The guarded look slowly melted into one of pure, stunned disbelief. It wasn't about the money, the manager could see. It was about the offer itself, the respect in it. A place to belong, even if just for a few nights a week. I don't know what to say," Leo whispered. "Say you'll think about it," the manager said, standing up. "Come back the day after tomorrow, around 5. Let me know. No pressure." He picked up the empty plate. "And for tonight, you're welcome to stay until we lock up. It's warm in here." The manager walked back towards the kitchen, leaving Leo alone at the table. Leo sat for a long time, looking at the piano in the corner, his fingers absently tracing invisible keys on the tablecloth. For the first time in many, many years, the path ahead didn't look like just an empty, lonely road. It had a small, warm light shining on it, right here in this quiet little restaurant. The restaurant felt different after he left. The air seemed to still hold the echo of the music, or maybe it was just the memory of it buzzing in everyone's minds. The manager finished closing up, but his usual routine felt off. The numbers on the spreadsheet didn't hold his attention. All he could see was the look on the man's face, Leo's face, when he had offered him the job. That stunned, fragile hope. The next day was the restaurant's day off, but the manager came in anyway. He had a mission. He called a piano tuner, a friend of a friend, and paid extra to have him come that afternoon. As the tuner worked, filling the empty dining room with the strange, plinking notes of his craft, the manager sat at the bar. He wasn't a dreamer by nature. He was a man who dealt with food costs and leaky faucets. But something had cracked open inside him last night. He thought about the other staff. The young hostess, the art student. She had come to him just before leaving, her eyes still bright. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she had said, her voice full of awe. The chef, a man of few words, had simply grunted while cleaning his station and said, "He plays from the gut. You can hear it." Even the grumpy dishwasher had nodded along to the music. This wasn't just about giving a guy a break. This felt like they had stumbled on a secret, a treasure that had been left on their doorstep. The manager knew, deep in his bones, that if Leo came back, nothing would be the same. 2 evenings later, at 5 o'clock sharp, the front door chimed out. Leo stood there again. He looked the same worn jacket, the same faded backpack, but there was a subtle difference. He stood a little taller. His hair was damp, as if he'd just washed it. He had made an effort. The manager felt a surge of relief so strong it surprised him. He hadn't realized how much he was hoping Leo would show up. "Hello," Leo said, his voice still soft. "Come in," the manager said, stepping aside. "We tuned the piano. Wanted it to be right for you." Leo's eyes flickered to the corner, and a genuine warm smile appeared. "Thank you. That's very thoughtful." They sat at the same corner table. This time, the chef brought out 2 cups of strong black coffee without being asked. He gave Leo a nod, which Leo returned. It was a silent language between men who understood hard work. "I thought about your offer," Leo began, cradling the warm cup in his hands. A lot, I want to say yes. But I have to be honest. I haven't played for an audience on a schedule in over 15 years. The shaking, the nerves, they might come back. I might let you down. The manager shook his head. Listen, after what we heard the other night, you could play chopsticks for 45 minutes, and it would be fine. But that's not the point. This isn't Carnegie Hall. This is my restaurant. If you need to stop in the middle and take a breath, you stop. If you only play quiet stuff for a month, that's fine. The only rule is that you play. No pressure. Just you and the piano. Leo looked down into his coffee. The manager could see the conflict in him, the fear of the old cage, warring with the simple, powerful need to share his music. The need to be useful. All right, Leo said finally, the word coming out in a sigh of surrender and relief. All right, I'll try. That first Friday night, the atmosphere was electric, but not for the customers. They didn't know what was coming. The buzz was all among the staff. The hostess had told a few of her regulars that something special was happening. The chef had prepared a special dessert, just in case. The waitstaff were abuzz, checking the piano area for any dust. Leo arrived an hour early. He went straight to the piano, alone. He didn't play anything loud. He just ran scales, softly, feeling the newly tuned keys, testing the action. He played a few chords, nodded to himself, and then just sat there with his eyes closed, breathing. The manager watched from a distance, his stomach tight with a nervousness he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't worried about his business. He was worried for Leo at 7 o'clock. As the restaurant began to fill with its usual weekend crowd, Leo stood up, smoothed his jacket he'd bought anew. Simple black shirt, the manager noticed, and sat back down. He started gently. A familiar piece by Mozart. Light, precise, beautiful. It was like a soft greeting to the room. People noticed. They smiled, murmured to each other. It was lovely background music, a clear cut above the usual weekend jazz. But as the first set went on, something began to change. Leo grew more comfortable. The music deepened. A piece by Beethoven followed, with more thunder in it. Heads turned. Conversations dipped. By the end of the first 45 minutes, the room was his. When he finished his last note, there was a moment of quiet and a warm, generous round of applause. Not the stunned silence of his first night, but real, happy appreciation. Leo smiled from the bench, a real, relaxed smile. He took a sip of water and took his break. The second set was where the magic truly returned. It was as if the first set had been him testing the waters, making sure the ground was solid. Now he dove in. He played a piece by a composer the manager didn't know, something modern and haunting. He saw the hostess stop in her tracks, a tray in her hands, just listening, her face full of wonder. He saw an elderly couple hold hands across the table, their eyes closed. There was no shaking. There was only music. It wasn't the explosive, soul-bearing storm of that first night, but it was deep, connected, and alive. He was playing with the room, not just for it. He watched people eat and laugh and talk, and his music wove through it all, making the ordinary feel special. During his second break, a woman from a table near the front approached him timidly. She was older, with kind eyes. "That piece you just played," she said. "It reminded me of my mother. She loved the piano." "Thank you." Leo's eyes got a little shiny. He just nodded and said, "Thank you for telling me. That means more than you know." Word began to spread that very night. By the third set, the restaurant was full, and not a single person was just there for the food. They were there for the piano. When Leo finished his final piece, the applause was long and loud. People stood up. They called out, "Bravo!" In earnest, Dot, after the last customer left, the staff gathered. It felt like a celebration. The chef clapped a big hand on Leo's shoulder. "You cook with your heart," the chef said. "I cook with mine. We're the same." It was the highest compliment he could give. The manager handed Leo a plain envelope with his pay for the night. Leo took it, feeling its thickness. "This is too much," he whispered. "It's exactly what we agreed," the manager said. "And it's worth every penny, more." The weeks that followed settled into a new rhythm. Leo became a fixture. His name wasn't on a marquee, but on a small, elegant chalkboard by the host stand. "Tonight, piano by Leo." He kept his simple life. He found a small, clean room to rent not too far away, paid for with his earnings. He still wore simple clothes, still carried that backpack. But the tired, haunted look in his eyes began to fade, replaced by a quiet peace. He would come in early, share a coffee with the chef, practice softly. He started to remember the names of the regulars who always asked for a certain song. The restaurant, in turn, flourished. Reservations became essential. They weren't just a place for dinner. They were a destination for an experience. The manager hired an extra server. The food, always good, now felt like part of a larger, beautiful evening. One night, after closing, an older gentleman in a nice suit waited until everyone else had left. He approached the manager. He introduced himself as a retired music professor from the university across town. He'd been coming for weeks. "That man," the professor said, nodding toward Leo, who was putting on his jacket, "is a once-in-a-generation talent. I knew his name from long ago. We all thought he'd vanished." The manager felt a protective spike. "He's happy here." "Oh, I can see that," the professor said quickly, raising a calming hand. "And it's a beautiful thing to see. I'm not here to scold or recruit him back to the stage. That world broke him once." He paused, choosing his words. "But that kind of gift, it shouldn't be locked away completely. It should be passed on. My department has a small program. An artist in residence. No concerts. No pressure. Just working with a few of our most gifted graduate students. Sharing what he knows. It's quiet. It's respectful. Do you think? Would he consider talking to me?" The manager looked at Leo, who was laughing softly at something the young hostess had said. He looked at ease. He looked like he belonged. "I don't know," the manager said honestly. "But you can ask him, gently." The professor approached Leo. The manager watched from across the room, not listening to the words, but watching Leo's face. He saw the initial flash of fear, the old instinct to run. He saw him listen. He saw him think. And then he saw him nod, slowly, and shake the professor's hand. Leo walked over to the manager afterward. "He wants me to teach." "Just a little," Leo said, his voice a mix of fear and a strange new excitement. "What do you want?" the manager asked. Leo looked at the piano, then back at the manager. I think I might like to try to give some of it away instead of just playing it out. If I can still do my nights here." "Your spot is yours for as long as you want it," the manager said, and he meant it. That night, as Leo walked home to his small room, the air was cool and clear. For the first time in 2 decades, he wasn't just walking away from something. He was walking toward something. He had a place. He had people who respected him. And he still had the music, not as a boo. The change didn't happen all at once. It was slow, like a plant finally getting the right amount of sun and starting to grow in a new direction. Leo began spending 2 afternoons a week at the university music department. At first, just walking through the grand doors made his palms sweat. The smell of the building old wood, dust, and the faint, metallic scent of brass from a practice room was a smell from another life. It brought back a flood of memories, not all of them good. The retired professor, who insisted Leo call him by his first name, which was simply John, had been true to his word. There was no fanfare, no announcement. Leo was given a small, sunny practice room on a quiet corner of the 3rd floor. He would meet with 2 graduate students there. One was a young woman with fierce focus and technical skill that reminded him of himself at that age. The other was a young man who played with a raw, emotional power but struggled with the discipline of the notes. Leo was terrified for that first session. He hadn't taught anyone ever. He'd only ever been the student, absorbing criticism. He didn't know how to give it, but a funny thing happened. When the young woman played a difficult passage with flawless, cold precision, Leo didn't think about fingering or technique. He heard what was missing. He gently stopped her. "It's perfect," he said. "But what is the left hand saying to the right hand here? Are they arguing? Are they helping each other? Try it again, and just listen to the conversation." The young woman stared at him, confused at first. Then she played again. This time she listened. And on the 3rd try, the music began to breathe. Her eyes widened. She hadn't just played the notes. She had understood them. With the young man, who stormed through a piece full of passion and mistakes, Leo took a different approach. "That feeling you have," Leo said softly, "that storm inside, it's good. It's real. Now let's build a house for that storm, so it doesn't blow everything away. Let's look at the bricks. These notes here." He showed him, slowly, how control could make the emotion even stronger. The young man, who was used to teachers scolding him for his lack of control, leaned in, fascinated. Leo walked out of that first session exhausted, but with a strange, buzzing energy. He hadn't performed. He had listened, and he had helped something unlock. It felt useful. It felt clean. Back at the restaurant, his weekend sets became something people planned their lives around. The little chalkboard by the door was a permanent fixture. He wasn't the mysterious piano genius anymore. He was just Leo. The regulars knew he liked a glass of water with a single slice of lemon on the piano bench. They knew if they humbly requested a certain song, he might, if he was in the right mood, weave a few bars of it into his next piece as a little gift. The manager noticed the change in him. The stiff, careful walk had loosened into a more relaxed stride. He joked sometimes with the kitchen staff. He even started helping the young hostess, the art student, with her music theory homework when it was quiet, drawing scales and chords on napkins. One Friday, about 6 months after he first walked in, something happened. It was a busy night. The room was full of the usual warm noise. Leo was in the middle of a set, playing a complex, beautiful piece by a French composer. He was deep in the music, but he was also present, aware of the soft clink of forks and the low hum of talk. Then, near the back, he saw a face dot. It was a man about his own age, with sharp, familiar features, wearing an expensive-looking sweater. He was sitting with a group, but he wasn't talking. He was staring straight at Leo, his mouth a thin, hard line. Leo's fingers stumbled. One wrong note clashed, ugly and obvious, in the middle of the flowing melody. A few people looked up, surprised. Leo's heart began to hammer against his ribs. It was an old classmate from music school, a man who had been a rival, and then, when Leo walked away, one of his loudest critics. The man's face was a mask of cold recognition, and Leo thought, disdain. The old feelings rushed back. The shaking started deep in his core. The crushing sense of being judged, of being found wanting. His vision tunneled. The friendly, warm room suddenly felt like a spotlighted stage, and every person was a critic. He stopped playing. The silence was abrupt, awkward. The manager, who was at the bar, straightened up, his eyes full of concern. The hostess froze. Leo looked down at the keys. He could feel the old cage doors slamming shut. He wanted to get up and walk out the back door and never come back. This had been a fantasy, a silly dream. People like him didn't get second acts. Then he heard a soft sound. It was the elderly couple who came every Friday. The woman, gently, began to tap her fingers on the tablecloth in a slow, steady rhythm. Not impatient, supportive, a simple beat. Wait, it's okay. The young man from the kitchen, the busboy who loved rock music, looked up from wiping a table and gave Leo a quick, encouraging thumbs dash up dot. Leo took a ragged breath. He looked away from the cold face in the back. He looked at the manager, who gave him a single firm nod that said, asterisk your house. Your rules. Asterisk, this wasn't music school. This wasn't a concert hall. This was his restaurant. He placed his hands back on the keys. He didn't go back to the French piece. Instead, he began to play the simplest thing he knew. A slow, gentle blues progression. Just a few chords, rolling over and over. It was honest. It was unbreakable. He poured the shock, the fear, the defiance into those simple chords. The music was no longer a fragile, complicated sculpture. It was a deep, steady river dot, and the room came with him. The conversations dropped back to a softer level, accepting this new direction. The cold-faced man in the back finally looked away, back to his friends, a faint scowl on his face. He didn't matter here dot by the end of the blues. The shaking had stopped. Leo seamlessly moved into a familiar, comforting sonata. The rest of the set was strong, solid, and true. When he finished, the applause was, if anything, warmer than ever. They had seen a crack in the armor, and they had watched him mend it right in front of them. It made the music more human dot afterwards. The old classmate left without a word. He never came back. The manager made a point of shaking Leo's hand after closing. You know, he said, I think that was more impressive than the first night you played. Leo just smiled, tired but peaceful. The ghost had been faced, and it had lost. Asterisk a year to the day after he first asked to play for a meal, the restaurant threw a small private party after hours. Just the staff. The chef made a huge family-style pasta, the same one he'd made that first night, but multiplied by 10. There was laughter and silly speeches. The manager stood up, tapping his glass. A year ago, he said, a guy walked in and made a trade. He got a plate of pasta, and we got our hearts cracked open a little. We got to remember what beauty sounds like. And we got a friend. He raised his glass to Leo, to the music. Everyone cheered. Leo, his face flushed with happiness and a little embarrassment, stood up. Thank you, he said, his voice thick. This place, you all. You gave me back the music without taking my soul. That's a gift I can never repay. He had brought something to show them. He walked to the piano, not for a performance, but to share a secret. He placed a single sheet of handwritten music on the stand. I've been writing again, he said, almost shyly. Just for me. But this one is for here. He began to play. It was a new piece. It had moments of the old, stormy passion, but it was woven through with something new. Warmth, security, a sense of place. You could hear the chatter of a restaurant in the lively high notes, the steady rhythm of friendship in the bass, and a beautiful, singing melody that spoke of a peace hard won. It was the sound of a man who was no longer lost dot as he played. The young hostess leaned her head on the shoulder of one of the waiters. The chef closed his eyes and smiled. The manager looked around his crowded, noisy, perfect little restaurant at the family they had all become. And he knew this was the best business decision. he had ever made. The man who had come in from the cold wasn't just playing for meals anymore. He was home. And his music, once a burden he carried alone, was now a gift he shared, filling the space around him with a sound that was finally and completely his own.